Let me tell you about El Oso.
As the back half of the 90s was underway, New York offbeat darling Soul Coughing spent some time on the West Coast with a lot of drum and bass and electronic tunes, especially since they had done some touring with the likes of Full Cycle and DJ Die. The band were just swept up in the hodgepodge of ideas that, unbeknownst to them, would still be within the pulse of their scene back east. Some of this became a source of creativity when deciding to pull together their third album, one whose production continued to be the more scattershot collaborative approach that was a part of their second album, Irresistible Bliss. Featuring frequent collaborator Chad Blake, along with frequent They Might Be Giants collaborator Pat Dillett, and popular British DJ Optical, they pulled together a release that continued to expand their already broad horizons while keeping their beat poetry roots still intact. It also ended up having some of their most popular tracks to date thanks to the catchier songwriting moments on it. I'm talking about the final outing from the band, their 1998 swan song, El Oso.
Similarly to last month when I talked about the Presidents of the United States of America, a band that I got into through their TV exposure, Soul Coughing is a band in the same vein. I got into this group because Cartoon Network made a couple of music videos out of tracks from this record, and the two tracks they chose actually embody a lot of the sonic characteristics that this album has going forth. In the case of Rolling, with its drum and bass sounds, encapsulates the entire vibe of this project. You know, while not necessarily a thread on every song, the drum and bass introduction is the biggest creative offshoot from El Oso, and I feel like leads to a lot of my favorite moments, whether it is that drone that coats the bottom of Rolling, or that fucking bass line on Blame. I love that Blame sort of builds to it too. It has this sort of like slow introduction until that fucking killer bass line comes in. And their drummer on this project, shouts out to them, because the drum and bass stuff, it's all them acoustic, so they're just Lewis Cole that shit, just playing these tight, intricate rhythms for the bass and accompanying instrumentation to play over, and it's insane. But also tracks like 300 and the closer, The Incumbent, all embody a lot of what the songwriting does on those drum and bass songs. But Circles as well embodies a lot of the more alternative side to this record, and the songwriting on it and Rolling have this sort of cyclical, almost mantra-esque vibe that is, again, indicative of a lot of the writing on this project. This project is just a really cool step, and if you're a long-time follower of the channel, you also probably know I'm not a stranger to talk about Soul Coughing, because when I did the Mad Sounds podcast, I exposed Mark, my co-host of that show, to their debut, which...
Not one of the more annoying ones vocally for me, but still the true dream. Especially when I started really elongating it toward the end.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
May not have been the best foot forward, while there are still a lot of poetics and beat jazz stuff on this project. It's definitely a lot more reined in. Sure, it's still there on tracks like St. Louise is Listening, and Maybe I'll Come Down, or Pensacola. It's still, or even on, you know, the more mantra-driven stuff like The Incumbent or So Far I Have Not Found Science. It's still a lot more songwriting on here than it was on Ruby Vroom. There's no 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. There's no counting of fives. There's no moments like that. Even the moments where they are getting a lot more hook-centric, it's nothing like, you know, True Dreams of Wichita, at least not to that regard. And I love Ruby Vroom, but they definitely kept it very idiosyncratic but presentable at the same time. Because, I mean, the hooks on Circles, on Misinformed, on Houston, on Monster Man, on Fully Retractable, all catchy-ass jams that have the same sonic palette and characteristics that they had presented on those on the first two records, just in a much more, again, palatable sense that electronically, production-wise, still fits in really well with those more electronic-driven drum and bass rooted tracks. And I like that Mike Doherty found a way to incorporate that, again, very cyclical songwriting scene on parts of Ruby Vroom and Irresistible Bliss really well with that, with the very mantra-esque, again, blame is the cure anything, throw the water down, like moments like that from Blame, or the sampling of Chris Rock on $300, I mean, Or again, rolling. Just the mantra of I'm rolling into the hey Norm, it was a throne with a broken arm. Those moments feel very soul coughing. It's just, again, reined in. And that's the greatest strength of this record, is it takes a lot of the greatness that this band had and just makes it a lot more presentable. And that's one of the things I really like about it. I like a lot of the production as well. Not even just on the low-end drones or the drum production, because in that drum production, for the fact that it's played on a real kit, it's produced like electronic drums in a really cool way. Like, it has this really cool sonic effect that you can tell it's live, but it feels manipulated, and that's nice. But I also like the accompanying sounds on tracks like Houston. They have this very kooky feel, same with fully retractable, or some of the glitchy sounds that come in on the Incumbent, which, again, that track is sort of a beautiful harmony of the electronic sounds and the alternative vibe that this record puts out. Its mantra is a lot more drawn out, it's a lot longer, and it feels like the most old soul coughing the whole record gets. Because this album still has its poetic nuance, that this slam nuance that the first couple of records had, especially on tracks like Fully Retractable, and Circles, with like Shoot Out Like a Housefly, This House Was Half My Mind, I Don't Dispute the Doubts You've Outlined, But It's My Right to Waste Your Time. Like, very, again, Doherty, poetic stylings. It's just well harnessed. And I guess that would come with time, with this band really ironing out their style and making it work over time. But it's just incredible how in 3 records they took this beat jazz vibe and melding it with quirky alt-rock, and they found ways to not only expand it, but make it still fit together. I love this record, and again, it was something that I got into very early on as a child, but at least with those pockets. But the older I got, the more that I really loved the lyrical touches and the turns of phrase that coat. Even the tracks that I knew as a kid, like Circles. That song is so very simple. Its hook is so very addictive. But the lyrics and the verses have that same spin of phrase, that same sort of twist in language that I think is a great aspect of Mike Doherty's writing. Like, when you were languishing in rooms I built to file you in, and when the wind set down in funnel form and pulled you in, and when the ghostly dust of violence traces everything, and when the gas runs out, just wreck it, you insured the thing. Like, there's, I don't know, there's just the way Doherty writes. It's very 90s, but in a way that works. And this whole, I'm not a big fan of the whole slacker rap aesthetic by and large. I think it's nice when Beck does it because he has this sort of postmodern edge that he puts on it. And Doherty more channels like the Everlast vibe tonally, but he has that same sort of postmodern, or at least poetic, nuanced vibe that works. When artists like That Handsome Devil and Beck do it, it's definitely clearly on the more bizarre side. But Doherty's laid-back presentation, I could see easily being swept into a crowd that I don't feel like he belongs in. I know that to some, Doherty's vocal delivery could be a barrier, but with this particular record, I think it works really well. And I think it's also because they're injecting more noise into it. Irresistible Bliss had some noise and classic alt sounds thrown into it, but they rein that into a different funnel on here, like I've said already, and I feel like it's also what helps make Doherty as a writer more, and as a singer, more presentable to people, Even when he melts down on Pensacola, because that track has this great build-up. Same with Maybe I'll Come Down. There's a point by the end of the song where Doherty's just a lot more visceral in his delivery, but Pensacola as a whole, that track is just this great enveloping wave that just gets more and more intense the more it goes on, and I think it works great. It's a great lead into the last half of the record, and it's incredible. There's a lot of great moments on here, but at its core, the band juggles its new ideas well, integrates them into their old sound, and made this hodgepodge production style work wonders for them. And like I said, this easily had some of the most accessible stuff in it, like Circles. Circles is a track that I feel like transcends a lot of this record. You've probably heard Circles. It's a song that really cast a shadow amongst the rest here. But even Rolling, because like I said, those two songs are what got me into the project, you know? Got me into this band, got me into this record, and I feel like it's easy for them to stand above all of that. But what's here, the secrecies and crevices of this record have a lot to showcase. You know, whether it is a good bass groove, a good drum line, you know, great production, cool, quirky sounds, or Doherty's writing. And I love this record. That's why I wanted to sit down and talk about it. And the legacy of this record isn't quite as staggering as others that I've talked about in this. This band in general, I feel like not a lot of people talk about. That's why I brought them on the Mad Sounds podcast. You know, they're a band that I feel like had a pocket in its scene, but even though this was their last record and it's sort of maybe unexpectedly, by the end of it, it feels like a good farewell. You know, they're from New York. The mantra of the incumbent is not going back to New York, pillaging forth somewhere else, and that makes sense. And, you know, it's interesting that Doherty still tours. He still does shows. You know, one of the songs I've had in the background of this is his reinterpolation of Fully Retractable, because he plays a lot more of an acoustic-leaning set, and so it's clear that he likes these songs, or he at least wants to have an attachment to them. But there's some components of it that maybe as time has gone on, he just looks back with bitterness or a distaste for. And that's interesting, you know, because he's a guy who I feel like definitely knows what he wants to make when it comes to music. And this record, as a whole, still feels like that. But it's interesting to hear these songs reinterpreted in the fashion that they are as Doherty tours the whole solo circuit and does this sort of acoustic renditions of these tracks, both from this record and otherwise. And ultimately, I feel like if you enjoy poetic-leaning alt-rock, or if you like poetic-leaning music, if you like good songwriting, I would recommend El Oso, at least as a starting point to this band, because I can understand not wanting the postmodern stuff like on Vroom Vroom, or the more straight-laced stuff that's on Irresistible Bliss. El Oso is a beautiful harmony of the two that I feel like is really well put together. And those are my thoughts on this record. Have you listened to this record? Do you like it? What's your favorite song from Soul Coughing? Do you remember those music videos that Cartoon Network used to make back in the day? Let me know in those comments down below. If you like this video, be sure to give it a like. If you want to see more of my music, gaming, and general nerdy content, be sure to subscribe. Special thanks to my patrons if you want to join the ranks to get early access to content, exclusive content, or to help drive the community. It's linked in the description. I'm going to get out of here. I have been Viral Rack. You guys are good days, lives, and situations, and I'll see you another day.
You